Hey guys, it's Jeff Shoemaker, broker owner of Remax Agility here in Aldie, Virginia. In a effort to fulfill my New Year's resolution to do way more content to our YouTube channel and also to Facebook, um, in addition to our agent interview videos that I'm doing on all of our agents, I'm also doing real quick videos, 3 to 5 minutes on common questions that I'm asked fairly often. And the reason for these videos is because it'll help our agents be reminded of some of these answers to these questions, and so they can also send them to their clients as well. You'd be surprised that as a broker, I'm probably asked maybe 30 or 40 questions pretty often. And I would say, when I say often, I mean like a couple times a week. So for the first video that I'm doing, I'm actually going to cover a really common topic question that I get all the time from my agents and also from the public as well. And so the thing that I think I probably this is one that I get asked the most. And so that question is usually from an agent, the most common, which is, Jeff, how come I have to have an agency agreement signed with a buyer before I show properties? Why is it so difficult to get buyers to sign them? I have the public ask, how come I have to sign this? And a lot of times I think agents are really uncomfortable answering that question because they haven't really thought it through, or they're a little nervous about people that might be apprehensive to sign an agreement. So to make this really simple and easy to kind of go through, what they're talking about is a buyer's agreement typically. In order to represent someone as an agent or as a brokerage, there has to be agency created between the buyer and the brokerage that's representing them. Now, agents have a really hard time with this because the buyer is not obligated to sign an agency agreement with you, but the agent is obligated to get you to sign one. So it can cause a little bit of contention when you're dealing with that. So what I thought I would do is just talk about why you have these things signed, why it's important. So the first thing would be, why brokers want agency agreements to be signed. This is why they're so emphatic about having it completed and having it done. Number one, agency agreements must be in writing in the state of Virginia. Now, this brokerage that I run, that I own, we're licensed to Virginia, DC, Maryland. Those states are very similar. In order to represent a buyer and that buyer be a client, to call them a client, they have to be in an agreement, an agency agreement with them. Now, the second reason why a broker wants those agreements to be signed is that in order to perform license duties, this is going to be to represent someone, to offer real estate advice, to offer advice on comparables or values. There's a whole list of things that are considered licensed activity. And in order to have those things take place with someone who is a said buyer, you need to have an agreement with them. Number three, that agreement protects the broker and it protects the agent. And how it protects them is there are a lot of absolutions for the broker, that the buyer can't hold the broker responsible for things that we're not being hired to do. So if an agent's not a home inspector, the agent's not a contractor for construction, they're not a CPA, they're not a lender, they're not an appraisal, they're not an appraiser. There's a whole lot of things that agents are and they're not, and we want to make it clear what it is we're being hired for and what it is we can be held to as far as a level of service. It's also going to make it very clear to the agent what their duties are, because in our state there are fiduciary duties that are involved in representing clients. In our state, there's an acronym for it. It's OLDCAR, and it's obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable due care and due diligence. Those are what that is what is owed to a client from a brokerage and from an agent. And the reason brokers are really serious about having these things signed and in place is that it puts a level of protection for us as a company that's out doing business, to make sure that we can cut down on disagreements between clients and agents, and that there's something that's not made clear. I also remind agents that you own your relationships. Your buyers and your sellers are your relationships. But when they're under an agency agreement or a listing agreement, they are the client of your broker. And you as an agent, if you're an independent contractor, there are a couple brokerage models where they're employees, but at any rate, as the agent, you are a hired independent contractor that's been employed by a broker to help assist that client in purchase or sale. So for the time that they're under that agreement, that particular client is the client of your broker. So now, the second part of this is, why would a buyer want to be under an agency agreement? Well, the first thing is it makes your agreement very clear. It makes it very clear to you if you read it, what your relationship is to that broker and to that agent. It makes it very clear what that broker and agent's responsibilities and duties are, if it's explained properly when you sign it and if you read it. It creates a commitment between you and that broker and agent so that they can then, number three, go out and they can represent you as a client. I hear agents very often will call or talk to someone and say, well, I have a client looking. And a lot of times we use the word client when we really mean customer. If you don't have an agency agreement, you don't have a client, you have a customer. They are the public until you have an agreement, and then they become a client. And so it's important that everyone understand what all those things are and why you do it. Now, a lot of times the reason that a buyer may not want to sign an agreement is that typically in these agreements, it's going to have a certain level of compensation that a buyer has to guarantee is paid to the broker so that the agent can get paid and the broker can get paid. And typically when a home is listed, there's some level of compensation offered to brokers and buyers or buyer agents who bring offers to that listing. And it's something that is advertised typically in the MLS, and actually very soon, based on a couple of class action lawsuits in the country, there's a couple of states that have these happening where we may actually end up seeing these commissions in the actual listings on Zillow and online, where you'll be able to search listings based on that commission amount. And the reason they want to make that visible is because if you're signing a buyer's agreement where you're agreeing to ensure that your agent and brokerage is being paid X%, if the listing is not paying that or paying less than that, most of those agreements say that as a buyer client, you're going to have to pay the difference between what you've agreed to have your agent be paid and what the seller of a home is paying through their listing agent. So those are all things that are important. You certainly wouldn't expect an employer to have you go to work and not be paid at the end of the week just because they decided not to pay you. In real estate, the reason we get agreements is to make sure that if we're going to go out and be responsible for up to 10 years, if the broker's going to be responsible on that transaction, that we can have complaints and lawsuits and litigations and issues and be called in to do deposition to go to court if parties don't agree. We want to make sure that we're insured at least a basic level of income and compensation. At the very least, that in the future, if we have to pay an E&O insurance claim, if something happens, we can at least pay our deductible to handle it. In most cases, those deductibles can be anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000. Really depends on your brokerage and what they have set up. So that is the basic reasoning behind why we want those signed. To kind of recap, one, it's the law. We legally are required to have you sign an agency agreement before we do any licensed activity. Now, there are agreements where you can have a buyer's agent and an open agency agreement where you could have agreements with multiple agents. And so if you're an investor or you're a buyer and you don't really want to commit to one specific brokerage or agent, there are agreements you can sign that don't make you 100% tied to that agent or broker. And you should talk to your broker or agent about that so that you can sign the type of agreement that you choose to sign. And it doesn't mean that in that agreement there aren't things that you can't mark out, check off, and anything that's taxable is negotiable. So anything in that realm, it's not all set in stone. The only thing that is set in stone is that you have to have an agency agreement of some kind, and that's why brokers want them. That's why buyers should want them, and that's why before you step foot in a property you're looking at to purchase or to rent for that matter, make sure you have an agency agreement signed. Make sure your arrangement with that particular person is very clear, that you understand it. If you do that, you're going to start off on the right foot. You're heading in the right direction. And I promise you, agents that want these signed, that want to do it by the book, if they want to do that by the book, they're also going to want everything else to happen in the proper and best way it can be. And that's going to keep you out of difficult situations with angry parties or people that are taking advantage of you. Pick the right people, make sure they're on the up and up and they do it the right way, and make sure you as a buyer do it the right way as well. So look out for more videos from me on more common questions that I have. I'm sure I'm going to have a whole bunch of these. I'm going to be doing these as I'm asked and reminded about questions I've answered in the past. Hope everybody's doing great, and we'll see you soon. Look out for more questions and answers.